Everyone is welcome here, it's time to make new friends. Aquavide Uskaba, fill your Glencairn. Share a dram with the spirit of Edmonton. Sluncha!
Good day, whiskey brothers, whiskey sisters, and whiskey friends, and welcome to the International Whiskey Journey. We are honored to have you, the viewer, and our panel with us here today. All these guys right here. My name's Dolph. I'm the founder of the International Whiskey Journey. I'm your host tonight. And for those of you that are new to us, I'm going to explain a little bit what we're about. We're a group of whiskey geeks that love to share a dram. But why an International Whiskey Journey, I ask you? Well, I love international whiskeys, and I don't believe they get the kudos they deserve, for one. This is therefore both a great way to drink fantastic whiskey and do my part to promote international whiskeys every weekend this summer. So I think it's a great idea. We're at the Copperworks Distillery, which represents the second distillery on our tour this summer. We're joined by Jason, Copperworks president, co-founder, Jeff, Copperworks vice president and co-owner, and our panel members, Joss, Ash, Kent, and Richard. So, ladies out there, gentlemen, whiskey brothers, whiskey sisters, whiskey friends, we're going to start our roundtable introductions with our names, our other platform handles. And when we finally get to Jason and Jeff, if you can tell everybody what we have in our Glencairns here, it'd be much appreciated. So let's start with Joss.
Joss here from Dram Society of Toronto. Live from Toronto in my backyard here. Very excited to be part of this, distillery tour of some wonderful drams, and I look forward to trying what's in my glass and all of our glasses tonight.
Excellent. And Ash, have you throw your introduction up there?
My name's Ash. I help run the Dram Society here in Toronto with Joss, and I'm a very big whiskey enthusiast and have been for the better part of 10 years. And I'm just excited to try this particular bottle because I've been looking at it for a while, and now I finally get to have my chance.
You've seen it on his shelf for a while, I'm guessing?
I've seen this at Craft, and it was something that we were planning on doing for our Advent calendar, and it was one of those ones that fit nicely into the American single malt profile there.
Perfect. Well, welcome, Ash, and thanks for that. Let's go on to Kent. No, it's supposed to be Kent, but Richard's there, so we'll do Richard. No, we're doing Kent.
Sorry. Okay, let me get unmuted because I was, thinking I was next. My name is Kent. I go by Whiskey Ass on pretty much all platforms, email as well. And we also got Copperworks in the glass tonight. Kind of curious. I have also walked by this bottle many, many times, and it's tweaked my interest, but there's a lot of stuff on the shelf. So we'll see how you guys handle with everything else we've been tasting lately. I have high hopes for you.
You better have high hopes.
I'll never be invited back.
No, that's it. No, that's hilarious.
Hey, greetings, everybody. Richard Lee from We Rock Whiskey Club on Salt Spring Island, and super happy to be here tonight. Looking forward to getting to taste something else from the West Coast. I run a whiskey club here. We drink a lot of whiskey, we taste a lot of whiskey, and talk about a lot of whiskey. So hopefully we can get some of this stuff into our lineups one of these times. So stoked to be here. Let's do it.
Thank you, sir. And Jason.
Well, hi. Thank you for having me on and Jeff on. I'm the president and co-founder of Copperworks Distilling. I'm very excited to finally meet some of you guys, virtually at least. We're going to be talking about a couple of different American single malt whiskeys tonight. We have, correct me if I'm wrong, but we have release 31 and release 32. What we'll be able to talk about are the different flavors in them, the different processes, and how we made everything different. And we'll just answer a whole bunch of fun questions. So anything you want to throw out there, we're up for.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. And now, Jeff, finish us off.
Yeah, I'm Jeff Canoff, Vice President, co-owner of Copperworks Distilling. And I'll just add to what Jason said. As a distillery, we make exclusively malt whiskey. So everything we do in the whiskey category is American single malt whiskey.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, kind sir. And I'm Dolph. You've seen me before, and you're going to hear me a lot, and you're going to not want to hear me so much. So I got some pictures and some things I want to show everybody right now. and let's look at all of us at the same time and not just one. So here's the distiller. I just kind of wanted everyone to get a kind of a picture as to where it is. So I'm going to have this picture. So that's where it is, just below. I'm focusing on British Columbia, I know, because I'm Canadian. But we see Seattle right where they are, the little reds. And this is thanks to Google Earth that I did this. And then we went a little bit closer. And I turned the picture around. Actually, the ocean's on the other side. Should be on the west and not there. But and another picture right there. So that's where you'll find them on Alaskan Way, Copperworks. And the outside of it, and I thought this was a fantastic picture because it was winter, and we don't always get the winter pictures from the international guys. So that's it. We're at Copperworks, a beautiful place. And here are the three owners. We know we only have two here now. And this good-looking guy on the far left, Mika, you won't see him tonight, but I'm going to have Jason, I'm going to have you kind of introduce who he is. And, well, he's the head distiller, but just a little bit more information on his background. But
yeah, so that's a great. And Micah pronounces his name Micah, even though I frequently take calls from Mika. But I always know who they mean. Micah is a friend of mine now for about 30 years. We started out as homebrewers together. We both lived in a house together here a long time ago, back when grunge wasn't even a thing.
Yep.
I had just become a professional brewer, so we've stayed in touch all these years, brewing together, home brewing together. And when it became legal in 2008 to do craft distilling in Washington State, it turns out that both Micah and I were independently thinking of opening a distillery. He was thinking of opening a small distillery with a friend of his. It was just going to be really a small kind of scrappy thing. I was thinking about doing something with beer because my background was brewing. And the long story short is we landed on Copperworks and decided to make a American single malt whiskey distillery focused on starting with a beer with no hops.
And 2009, October 2, 2009, I'm getting my information from its article called Taste the Dram magazine, Copperworks Distilling Interview. So October 2nd, you get together. You're at one of the tastings at your home because you did whiskey tastings before this. I kind of wanted to get a little bit of information about the whiskey tastings because I think that's an important piece of the puzzle for us to figure out what you were aiming for, what you liked the most, or what kind of got your interest beforehand.
That is a great
question about these tastings, please.
I mean, it's really what got us started. So let me give you kind of the way this worked is both of us were interested. I was taking sort of an academic approach to this with, okay, if I'm going to be opening a distillery, what are the flavors I'm looking for? What's the big hole? You know, if there's a Venn diagram, where can we fit in where's not something else? So we were tasting whiskeys. I'm from Kentucky. I had access to dozens, literally hundreds of bourbons, but I wanted to make malt whiskeys. So I was buying and collecting lots of malt whiskey. Became a little bit of an obsession, so watch out. But we ended up having monthly tastings. I'd lay 4 to 8 bottles on the table. We had official tasting notes. I had developed a little tasting wheel and laminated that, had color spectrum. So we were really spending a good time writing notes and really evaluating this stuff like geeks would do. And one week I put a bottle of Stranahan's Colorado whiskey, release number 23, on the table. None of us had ever tasted it before. We cracked the seal after having already tasted 4 or 5 whiskeys, and our minds just exploded. What is this whiskey? It's not a bourbon, but it kind of has barrel flavors. It's not a Scotch, but it has malt flavors. Back then, I didn't know anybody, so I went on to Flickr, the website where people post pictures, and searched on Stranahan's, and sure enough, people had taken pictures of Stranahan's, and I was able to snoop on them and discover their process. Later, I got in touch with them and learned a lot more. But we decided, based on that flavor, Micah and I decided that we wanted to open a distillery with the sole goal of making American single malt whiskey and the sub goal of beating Stranahan's.
Oh, okay, good. And how do you think you're faring against Stranahan's right now?
Size-wise, we're a drop in the bucket, but flavor-wise, I feel like we're giving them a really good run for their money.
Nice. Okay, and this is important because I read the story. You went, you fell in love with single malts or Scotch on a trip with your parents. This is a little while ago, and your first bottle that you bought of whiskey was Jura. And I have a picture of Micah as well, and he's at where was this? Belvinea.
Do you know where that is? Do you recognize that? That's the Mash Tun. That's in Aberlour.
Is it?
Yeah,
excellent.
We were there buying the stills, and we all wore derby hats at the time. Micah and I did, because we were thinking of naming the company Derby Distilling. Micah, that is the coolest picture of one of the coolest pictures of Micah.
I'll put it back up.
Yeah, and
I wanted to put it there because he's important to the whole process, and he's the main distiller. Is that right? Can we say he does most of the distilling?
Well, you can say he did that until about 2.5 years ago. Micah promised me that he would give me 2 years of hard labor, and he gave me 5 years. He decided with some health issues in his family that the right thing to do was to train. It took 2 people that he had to train to replace just him. So we trained 2 new distillers. That was a couple of years ago. One of them left during the pandemic to go leave the industry, get into IT, normal thing for distillers to do, I guess. And then Micah consulted for the first year, but he's now very much enjoying a little less day-to-day stress, but is still a major owner. He owns equal shares that I do.
Well, you can take the guy out of the distillery, but not the distillery out of the guy, right?
That's right.
I'm glad, and I'm glad we had a picture of him. And actually, that's not the only picture either. We've got another one here, his bio, and we got these 3 bios on your website. So if people want to go to the website, they can do that. And it's what is it? It's copperworksdistilling.com or distillery.com. I keep making
Nope, you're right the first time. It's distilling. We gave that a lot of thought, and we decided copperworksdistilling.com was going to be our brand. So that's it.
Thank you.
So with him leaving, did the 2 of you pick up a part of his? Did you learn how to distill to any kind of level that he does, or you just kind of that you're the master?
Well, so if you really think back at how this whole thing started, Micah and I were brewers. Neither of us had distilled. It wasn't a thing that we had any skills in. We had skills in yeast management. We had skills in managing malt. We knew all about everything up to the fermentation, to the point of drinking that. But once that left, we knew nothing. So we got a little Portuguese alambic still, or we had a friend that had a little Portuguese alambic still, whatever. And we learned to make really small batches. We were fortunate that we ordered a 1 gallon full thickness stave from the Gibbs Brothers Cooperage in Arkansas. And the reason I say that is because they make very high quality small casks instead of sort of these kind of cheap Mexican casks that even though they're made of North American wood, they kind of look like they're just for hobbies.
I've got them.
And so
I've got 2.
We made 10 days of fermentation, so 10 different batches that we distilled into low wines and then redistilled that into spirits, put it in there, counted 41 days because we had heard that it was 41 days per gallon. Who knew? We knew nothing. And in 41 days, we popped the cork. My girlfriend was there filming, and she said, as soon as I saw your eyes, I realized you're going to open a distillery. And that's what we did. We didn't know how to distill, so we visited Scotland, and we talked to Richard Forsyth, and he put us in touch with a bunch of distilleries there. They gave us a bunch of information. I visited a bunch of the small distilleries here, and Micah was along with some of those. But I'd have to say we learned how to distill from talking to Scottish distillers and using their equipment. That's one of the values of buying a really high-quality company like Forsyth, is they're there to support you. And so they told us how to run it. They shipped an engineer out here, make sure we had installed them right, and make sure we knew how to run them. We had them upside down, but he helped us flip them right. And no, that's a joke. And
that's good. That's good. On the side, they fit in that way. That's good. Jeff, I'm going to have you in here right now because I'll show your bio. There's your bio, and you look a little bit younger in that bio than you do now. I'm wondering how stressful your job is. Take a look at Jeff there.
I think I've aged about 20 years in 5 years' time, but you know.
So tell us about your past, because it's really interesting. You were a lawyer, right? Decided.
Yeah, so
I'll let you go with it.
Yeah, so I was a lawyer doing securities, financial industry type work in New York City at a large law firm. And I never really liked it. You know, I liked the place I was at all right. I liked the people I was around, but the work was not something I was interested in. And frankly, I would see lots of people, you know, leaving jobs to go explore their passions. And usually they were a lot older, right? Usually they were in their 50s, even their 60s. And they say, you know what, I'm done with this career stuff. I'm going to go find something I love. And I thought, well, what if I can kind of skip all that time in between and find something I love right away? And I kind of knew right away it was going to be beer, spirits, food industry. And so I convinced my now wife, just girlfriend then, to move out to Seattle, knowing that there was a lot going on in Seattle in terms of, you know, coffee and beer and food. And then this kind of new craft distillery scene was happening a lot. And I kind of just pushed my way into the industry through a couple of different avenues, which we can talk about more if you want. And, you know, that was almost 10 years ago now. And here we are at Copperworks. So
was that picture 10 years ago?
No, that picture was probably only 5 years ago, to be honest. Okay. A little scary, huh?
No, you look a lot better on camera than I do, so we're just going to leave it at that. I was asking a friend yesterday, though. It's kind of funny because I've interviewed quite a few distillery owners, and quite a few were lawyers beforehand. And what is the link between lawyers and distilling? And he said, well, I guess they all drink, or they all hate their jobs and all finding something different. So I need you, Jeff, to tell me where the kind of link is for, because you got to know other lawyers that have gotten into the field as well, right?
Yeah, you find them all the time. Like you said, it's very common. I'll try to put a little more positive spin on it. A lot of us practice in New York, right? Because that's sort of the epicenter of the legal industry in this country. New York has some amazing cocktail bars, some of the best in the world. And that was a big driving force for me, right? I was drinking at all these amazing bars and meeting all these bartenders that were teaching me about old classic cocktails. You know, that kind of scene was just new at the time. You know, this was back in like 2008, 2009. So it wasn't quite as developed, the craft cocktail scene, as it is now. And I think that just really got me into it. Then, you know, you taste the cocktail, then you start saying, well, what is this made out of? And then you say, well, what other bottles are similar to this and how are they made? And it's funny, you know, Jason tells the story about Stranahan's, and I was probably having my first taste of Stranahan's pretty much around the same time. It might have even been the same year, honestly, because I remember having it in a bar in Boston. I went to law school in Boston, and I had a buddy that we would go around drinking beer everywhere, trying out different beers. And then we started to explore the whiskey shelf. And I remember seeing the Stranahan's bottle and thinking, well, what the heck is Colorado whiskey? Because I think that was more prominent at that time than calling it a single malt or American single malt. Right. And so we both tasted that and we were like, wow, this is unlike the other whiskeys we're tasting. And then, you know, kind of spiraled from there, just like it did for Jason.
Excellent. Good background for both of you. So we've got a brewer, we've got a lawyer. And what was your job prior to being a brewer there, Jason? Because you worked in 2 or 3 breweries, I believe, right? But
so in '89, I was the first brewer at the Pike Place Brewing right up here in Seattle, Washington. When we opened the Pike Place, by the way, there were about 250 breweries in America. So we were pretty early in that.
Ground floor.
I decided to make my career in it. Went down to Evergreen State College, which I call Evergroovy. It's down in Olympia. Did chemistry, microbiology. Helped open up Fishtail Ales down there. Trained their brewers. Got their brewers started, and then graduated. Came up here and worked in Red Hook when they were still independent and they were owned locally, and were in Fremont. And then after a year and a half there, stole their ideas and got the chance to go open Pyramid Breweries and became brewmaster at Pyramid. Stayed there for about 7 years and then got into IT, worked for 13 years in IT, last 7 years at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And really thought I'd never go back to production until it happened that it was legal to do craft distilling. And that's when we pick up the story that Micah and I meeting.
Well, you met before it was legal. And I think the article said that you were waiting to see it over the 2 years. You were waiting to see if it was going to become legal and what the incentives were. So how did they make it a glorious entry for you to do it? Why did you want to do it?
I'm going to correct it. It's a little different. It was already legal, but we were a private state. That meant that we had, or we were what's called a control state. That meant that we had the liquor, and at the time called Liquor Control Board. It's now called Liquor Cannabis Board. They kept the same letter, changed the middle one. The LCB controlled everything, and that was ideal. That meant that we had one customer. They always paid their bills on time in 30 days. They did everything for you. You didn't have to market to them. If you made the production and you were in Washington, you were guaranteed to be in all 354 stores if you could make that much. If not, you could pick how many stores you wanted to be in. It was very easy, and they took a 54% margin for that. 1100 initiative came out. It was Costco and big box stores here running it. And we said, nope, if that happens, we're not going to become distillers. It's going to be a wild west out there, and we can't afford the marketing money. And 1100 failed. The distributors put out one called 1105. It failed the same year. So there were two in one ballot. Both of them failed. And then Costco found a lot more money, put $13 million into it, and won 1183 the following year. But by then, we had already decided to become a distillery. We had already purchased the stills. And so the ground shifted under us, and we just said, well, we're just going to keep moving anyway. We're going to open in what's now going to be a private state. I'm glad that we did, but I'm not glad that we privatized. I don't think any Washingtonians are glad about that. Their price per bottle went up about $10 a bottle. So,
but as craft distillers, we like to do everything the hard way. So we're thankful that it became more difficult.
Yeah.
It made you stronger for it. And here's pictures of the stills where you're getting, you're getting your still in, your spirit still right beside your gin still, and here's the other stills in there, and they're Forsyth stills. And I'm really interested in how you decided, because you started with quite a bit. You weren't starting with one still or two stills. You started with a sizable distillery. To start off with, because we've seen some very small ones here.
Yeah.
People just starting out. And I guess it depends on how much money you have or investments you have at first, but yours is fairly sizable. And I'm wondering, one, how did you decide where to go? So on foot traffic, zoning, size are good, but I didn't know that would have been easy on the waterfront where you are. So did you have to fight to go there, or were you already zoned for it? And two, who were you talking to decide how to set up your distillery? Your brewers, you're thinking brewery-wise, but what changed how you were going to conceptualize everything within this distillery, please?
No, those are great questions. I really appreciate your deep questions. So when Micah and I were looking at where we were going to set up, my experience, so my value proposition to this company is that I had set up several breweries and I had the experience of doing that, and I'd learned a lot about the physical act of doing it, and also some of the challenges that you'd meet. So I felt qualified to do this, and the waterfront was the obvious place. If we couldn't be in the Pike Place market, which I wanted to be in a place that had fresh customers every day. Somebody with a pocketbook ready to learn about your product and invest in you a little bit, and then become, a long-term customer from wherever they live. So it made sense to be in a high tourist market, not in some little area that was in, a neighborhood or down in an industrial park. As we opened, we found this place had 3,400 square feet. We went ahead and said yes, not knowing how in the world we were going to make that little space work. And over the months, we just kept working hard until we got it up to 7,000 square feet. That felt big enough to set up the distillery. So we set it up here. It was already zoned as light commercial. All we had to do is just work with a distillery. I felt qualified to build plants. What I didn't know is how to do a distillery. So when we went to Forsyth, I already told them I was going to do all the brew house. I was going to do all the fermentation. I was going to do all the rick house. What I needed is somebody who knew how to build stills. So Mike and I just visited 10 different distilleries, learned what they had, went back to Richard Forsyth and says, we want a gin still, a vodka column, a beer stripping still, and a whiskey still. And we picked out the shapes. We made sure they fit through the door. The biggest still had a half an inch to make it in. And then we installed them locally and then flew their engineer out to help us commission them.
Nice. And you're not brewing there. Tell us a little bit about the 3 breweries you're going with now. And when did you make that decision? Because that was based on size as well, right?
It was, right? So when we decided that we had 7,000 square feet, we did some quick back of it. We were thinking that we needed around 25,000 square feet to do a really good size thing, and that was unaffordable. So it was always in the back of our mind that, well, look, why do we need to build the brewery when we have such great brewing partnerships? So the Pike Place Brewery, my first brewery, is 3 blocks up the road. They have a $2 million vertical 3-tier system. They offered to brew with us. I'd heard a fellow named Dick Cantwell about 29 years ago. He opened up the Elysium Brewery. They had just built a $6 million brewery south of us 5 miles. We brewed there today. And then, I don't know, about 5 years ago, we met Matt and Sarah. They have a $30 million brewery over in Ballard called Fremont Brewing. Those 3 brewers have stepped up to just remarkable efforts to really help us make our wash. We ship 5,300 pounds of grain to their place. We show up with a truck that's capable of bringing all that wash back, and they do the mash, they do the milling, they do all the button pushing, but we make all the recipes, we specify all the malt and have it shipped them. And then we bring it back here, we add yeast and do fermentation on site.
And get it going. We're going to ask you questions about the malt bills and the yeast and stuff later, but I'm going to ask panel, any questions from you guys on their startup, how anything? We're going to talk to Jeff in a second about American Single Malt, but anything that's piqued your interest?
My first question is, because you're giving them basically your mash bill, do they end up taking that and canning it as a beer as well?
No, it's almost the other way around. We are very interested in eventually turning some of our beers into, some of our whiskeys into beer, but right now our mash bills are so simple. One of them is 100% pale malt. Okay. The other one is based on the last beer I made up at Pike was called the Kilt Lifter. It's a Scotch Ale. It's kind of like that. It's about 25% caramel malts, crystal malts, roasted malts. And brewers know how to make, I mean, they just shed recipes. It's so easy for a brewer to make a recipe. What we're hoping to do is when we're just starting a campaign to build a new brewery of our own. So we'll still partner with these guys and we'll have our own brew house. In that case, we'll also be able to make a little bit of beer.
Thank you, sir. And Greg from Craftworks Spirits just wanted to say hi, so I put that on there. So hi to you. And they have, I hear, a great relationship with you guys. Craftworks were one of the first ones to pick you up in Canada, or the first, or the only?
Yeah, the only. Yeah, so they kept coming by and showing how excited they were about our whiskey, and eventually we said, yeah, let's do it. Let's head up to Canada. We've been very careful with our distribution, just because, you know, even though we have a sizable distillery, we still have trouble making enough whiskey to keep up with the demand in our home state. So we didn't want to go too far, you know, in our own country and beyond before we knew we could support those markets. But Greg and Yarka at Craftworks, they really proved to us that they were, you know, going to champion our brand in the right way. And so we signed on with them and said, you know, let's do it. Let's start selling up in Canada.
And they did. And he says, thanks to Pearl Jam, they were going to, Yarka was telling me the story, they're going to Pearl Jam concert and they're walking around the waterfront and just came across your distillery, went in, fell in love with the place, and here we are now. So that's it. They found Copperworks. And
I don't want to boost his ego too much, but they do a pretty damn good job of promoting stuff around here.
Yes, they do.
Great.
You're fantastic. Jeff, I'm gonna stick with you for a second, if that's all right. And you're not camera shy. I see you in a lot of IGTV videos, which are great. I've watched not all of them, but a healthy portion of the Friday night ones, and Jason's when he was doing the tour as well. So we see a lot of the videos. But one time I saw you just recently, well, I don't know if it was a recent thing, but it was on Whiskey Cast with Mark Gillespie, and you're talking about American single malt. Now, I watched it, but I'd like you to tell us why you want there to be a definition for American single malt, and what's the progression right now with the TTB, which is the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau in the States, because they're the ones that we're going to establish this definition. Is it established now, and why did you want that?
Yeah, so I'll say some things. Jason can also join in too, since he's actually he's one of the officers on the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission, which is the group we have established to, not only create that definition legally, but also just promote the category in general. So it started as 9 of us, including Copperworks, and now there's about 170 members that support our definition for American single malt. So kind of the first easy answer is no, there is not currently a legal definition for American single malt whiskey. So the one we're going on is the one that those 170 members have agreed to. And then something that's quite positive is we're pretty optimistic that we're heading towards a definition because we were just recently included by the TTB in the Spring Unified Agenda, which basically means they're going to propose a rule for American single malt whiskey, and then it'll go through a public comment period, and then hopefully it will turn into an actual rule and legal definition for American single malt whiskey. And we've been in contact with them, constantly over the last really 5 years or so since the American Single Malt Commission, American Single Malt Whiskey Commission was started, and they are very much on board with our ideas there. So we're fairly confident that it will be the definition or very close to the definition that we're promoting, which I can walk through right now if you want me to.
I need to know why it's important. Why?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Here.
That's the big question. So there's tons of reasons. The first one is, I think, fairly obvious. You want to protect it, right? You want to make sure it actually means something to say American single malt whiskey on your bottle. So you don't want people coming in and doing things that are quite clearly not that category, and then therefore confusing the consumers. And then by obtaining that sort of recognition and definition, you can work on that education, right? All the way from the bar owner level to the retail store level to the consumer level. And you can kind of get beyond just what is American single malt and start educating about particular bottlings and particular brands, because people, after a definition is created, will now understand, what that category is. And we won't have to kind of start at those basic building blocks first and foremost,
Okay. Sounds good to me. Well, and we're used to the States having very strict guidelines as to what makes whatever it is, all the categories that we had. And we were talking to Kent, help me out. Who told us about all the categories in the book club that we had before? Oh, no. Christmas, Robin Robbins.
Yeah, Robin Robbins, yeah.
So many different categories. And we went through, I think it was 25 minutes we actually going through each category and what made one different from the other. And we're not used to that so much in Canada. So when we talk about whiskey, we have a broad line, and our distillers like that. So Dr. Don from JPY's, we're talking to him, and he loves the fact that he's able to create something, and he has that much flexibility in how he could actually produce. So, or blend in his case. So I was surprised watching that there was not a category for American single malt already defined, that it would be 100%. Or tell me, Jason, what's holding it up? Are they trying to figure out a way or figuring out a percentage of the malt that has to come from the United States? Is it, or, okay.
No, it's much simpler than that. They got roughly 750 comments, almost all in support. So that's more than they got in anything else. And it actually freaked them out. They were like, oh, this is kind of a big deal. This is such a big deal that we're not going to include it in all of the other things that didn't get nearly as many comments. They're easier to do. We're going to do this as its own special moment. And that moment had to get on the agenda. And it looks like it's going to be December when we have this done. but that's not that far from now. So we're patient and optimistic that the real challenge was that we really did everything so well. And I'm not taking the credit for this. This is primarily Steve Hawley from Westland, put together so much of a vision, and we all got together and we thought we were going to disagree on everything. And we, in fact, agreed on everything. It was just like, yeah, well, that was easy. We thought it was going to be a 15-hour meeting, and it was like 2 hours, and most of that was drinking. So, so this was. What's
the major lines that you all have consensus on then, right now?
Well, the simple thing, of course, is that it's 100% malted barley. So we took a bunch of the ideas that come from Scotland and a bunch of the ideas that come from American whiskey, and we combined them. And only in a few places did we broaden them. We wanted to make a big enough tent not to stifle innovation, but not so broad that it would actually become meaningless. So it's 100% malted barley, just like it is in Scotland. It's
so no unmalted grain then.
No unmalted grain, not Ireland, right? Just Scotland, because that Scotch Malt Whiskey Society is so protective of that. Yeah. We looked at. It had to be distilled at one distillery entirely, but not brewed and fermented. Why? Because Copperworks is at the table. And I said, I want to make a mash outside of our brew house, of our distillery. And everybody said, that's a cool idea. You should be able to do that. Let's only make it so that it's distilled at one distillery, but it can be mashed elsewhere and then brought in. So it does have to be mashed in the United States. It does have to be distilled and matured, but it doesn't have to be mashed in the same distillation plant.
Okay, so that's two broad lines so far. Is there a third?
Yeah, so it has to be matured in oak. Why oak? Because we are following the standard that the world thinks about whiskey is matured in oak. And it has to be smaller than 700 liters. We took that right out of the Scotch malt whiskey guidelines. Again, if it gets so big that the wood doesn't have an impact, then it's not really maturing. It's sort of like, well, it is maturing, but it's more like a foeder at that point, and that wasn't what we were looking for. We also used the American terms. It had to be distilled at no more than 160 proof or 80% alcohol, so that it wouldn't become light whiskey or vodka category. And it had to be bottled at or above 80 proof, again, just like all the other whiskeys in America. So those were just natural whiskey terms.
Perfect. And did we say over 3 years? Are you giving any time?
No age statement. We left off age statements because we wanted, we didn't specify minimum barrel sizes or minimum ages. We wanted to make sure that people could innovate however they wanted, as long as they had those basic criteria that we thought would create a similar enough story and flavor to be a category.
And part of that speaks to American whiskey rules in general. So American whiskey, get a little feedback. American whiskey in general has to be, you have to put the age on your bottle unless you're over 4 years. So there are already rules in whiskey in general that kind of regulate that. So you don't have to have specific rules for each category.
Right.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Well, you know what? I'm hearing about the single malt, so it's time. We're going to delve into the 31. I know we've all been drinking this already, gentlemen, but Ash and Joss and Richard and Kent, I need to know what you gentlemen think about. We're going to do the nose, the palate, the finish. We're going to talk about it all. And then Jason, Jeff, tell us if we're missing something, or you tell us we're wrong too if you want. That's fine. So I'm going to start with Ash and Joss. What do you get on the nose? Oh, and I just one little question. And I love everything that you put on the label. I really do. But this right here, what is the 5 malt makes sense. Full pint. Full pint is a mash bill that you've used before. Is that what that is?
No, so thank you for asking about that, because it's something we're very proud of. We do single farm, single vintage, single variety malts. So think about treating grain like grapes. We're looking to determine whether or not a variety of malt has a different flavor than another variety of malt, just like you would expect from grapes. Well, it turns out they do very much. And Full Pint is a malt that was came out of OSU, Oregon State University. Pat Hayes came up with that. And it was their first commercial malt. We wanted to celebrate that. So that's the name of the barley that was malted. It's called Full Pint. I had one before. It's called Half Pint. And this is Full Pint.
Thank you, sir. Ash, you've had enough time to actually nose it now. What do you think?
I like this a lot because it's not what I was expecting. Usually I get scared when I smell something that's really young, like it's extremely young. I expect it to be very like with a lot of high alcohol in the nose, not a lot of depth, but this was strikingly different. On the nose, I get like a nice caramel to it. There is a touch of earthiness in the nose if you dig a little. It's sweet. It's not hot as I expected. Again, like when I taste something that's really young and at 50% alcohol, I expect it to have that youthfulness, and it doesn't speak that way. It's impressive. And then getting into like palate and finish. I don't know if you guys got this, but while I was tasting it, I got that black pepper. But unlike black pepper, I had this like minty, like menthol peppermint kind of thing, with a cooling sensation in my mouth. And I don't know if anybody else experienced that.
Sounds like you're talking about rye a little bit. So it's, I do like my rye.
It was like a malty bourbon single malt.
All right.
I had to put a label on it.
Thank you, sir. Joss, do you corroborate your friend's story? What
yeah, I mean, Ash mentioned the caramel. I got some burnt sugar in there. I was also going to add that my initial sip on it, I kind of looked at Ash. I said, do you get like almost like just like a kind of like a red wine finish just on the end? It's just got like not a lot, but just there's like a bit of a tannic element to it. It's a little drying, but the more I've had it, actually, the more I find it kind of coats my mouth, and that kind of goes away. So I don't necessarily believe that's the case. It doesn't indicate anywhere in the bottle, but that's just my experience.
I do find it drying as well. It does have a drying quality, and it's nice. It's not like off-putting at all. It's really welcoming. It lingers beautifully in the mouth. I enjoyed it really thoroughly, and my experience with American single malts is limited to McCarthy's and now this, and I do prefer this wholeheartedly. Not because I'm on the show or anything. It is just it is better.
Good answer. Awesome and great analysis there, gentlemen. But we're going over to Richard. We're going to see what Richard thinks.
Yeah. First of all, I really love the ABV on it. I like that the 50% sort of carries a little bit heavier weight to the whiskey. It's got a spice to it. Again, I think, as Ash was saying, not exactly peppery, but I don't really know what sort of spices it is. But like a bourbon, I guess Ash was talking about that too. The burnt sugars that Joss was picking up, I do too. But the interesting thing for me on this particular whiskey is after you take a sip or two, and not as much now that it's had the opportunity to open up, but in the first few minutes, just that sort of coffee sort of flavor that kicks in the finish. So I'm really liking it. I've had a few different American single malts. All of them seem to be strikingly different. But yeah, no, this is definitely one that it's going to find a nice place on my shelf. That's for sure. So
you still have quite a bit of that Copperworks left. I gave away.
I have. Yes. It's all about how quickly it got here and how I can distribute the samples. You'll notice the other ones that I had over the last couple of tastings, they're quite poured out, but this one just didn't have a chance to give it out to some people. So that'll be coming soon.
Dolph, just because you drank it yourself, no one's judging, bud.
I'll take that. I'm okay. But this is lovely. It's lovely. Kent, you're up.
Well, unlike these guys, I didn't get a bottle. I got a sample, and it wasn't damn near big enough.
You got 2 ounces. That's it.
Well, Cheryl got 1 ounce. I got 1 ounce. She's upstairs talking on the side. So I was kind of taken back by this. I didn't bring my sample bottle down, so I didn't realize it was 50 ABV. This drink's like much lower. It is very, very easy. Like I would feed this to somebody that's never had a whiskey before and be comfortable in knowing that they'd probably quite enjoy it. It comes off on the palate for me more like it's got a wheat content to it. You get that really soft, smooth, almost like sucking on like a Swiss melted milk chocolate bar. Kind of just that nice, easy flow over the palate. It's just okay. I wish I phoned you guys a long time ago. I haven't been this surprised by a whiskey in quite some time. So,
thank you. Better late than never.
Yeah.
Yes. And how about the finish? No one talked about the finish except, actually, no, just talked about the drying on the side, and I'm getting that as well. And Rich, actually, you talked about the finish too. Kent, tell me about the finish.
Again, I get the little bit of peppery at the start. I get that milk chocolate smoothness through the middle, and then there is a little bit. I wouldn't call it astringent, but you know when you eat something like absolutely sugary, you get the watering in the back of your jaw, and it's just like your mouth is just on overload.
It works with the salivary. It gets dry, and then you just start watering it, and the flavors come.
And it keeps going. Like it's got a very long finish to it. Again, I'm blown away by this.
And these are generally, and I have to say this, we're on the international whiskey journey, but all of our panel members below, we're generally Scotch members. I'm president of the Alberta Scotch Society, but we've been working on our different palates, and Canadian whiskey tastes different from Scotch. Canadian whiskey tastes different from international whiskeys. American single malts are different from Scotches, and I think we all have to appreciate the difference and come to analyze them differently. And that's what I've been trying to do with my group here in Alberta, trying to just see the liquid for what it is and not try to compare it with something else, which sometimes is a good thing because you can compare a 3-year-old single malt from the States with a 12-year-old from Scotland, and they're very comparable, and that sounds fantastic and it sounds good, but I don't think we should compare it on those terms. Gentlemen, so Jason, Jeff, what do you two think about our analysis, and is there something else that you wanted us or you want the purchaser to actually get out of your dram as well that maybe we didn't mention?
Well, let me start with a process and respond, and then I want to hear Jeff's answer to that for sure. But my comments to you guys is you're finding a lot of the things that we wanted you to find.
Good.
How do we get some of those flavors in a 3.5-year-old whiskey? Is that we're making a beer and we're using a brewer's yeast. We do a 70-degree fermentation for a week and then 2 weeks of cold conditioning. So we're in for 3 weeks like you would be in a regular beer. That's our wash cycle. And then when we do that distillation, we carry over a lot of the sugars that were not fermented by brewer's yeast. They would have been fermented by distillers yeast. So you're tasting the esters and the sugars, maltodextrose, maltodextrose, that makes it all the way through distillation, comes along with the alcohol, becomes part of the texture, the body. That's where a lot of those chocolate notes and coffee notes are coming from, not just the Kelvin's barrels, which are great barrels, by the way, Kelvin Cooperage out of Louisville, but also the fact that we're putting a sweeter new make whiskey in that has so much more in the way of esters, which is why we can bottle at a higher proof, which is why it has a longer finish. So it all comes back to the beer. Everything that we do is predicated on the fact that we started with a beer instead of a traditional wash. That's where these flavors come from. So that was a rambling answer. Let's hear Jeff's answer.
That's a very good answer. We like our detailed answers here. Thank you very much, Jason. Jeff.
Yeah, and I totally agree that I think the panel got a lot out of it that we would assume a panel would get out of it. And I like Kent's comment about, he would serve it to someone he doesn't know if they love whiskey or not, and he'd feel comfortable knowing that they would, find this tasty. And I think that illustrates an important part of our whiskey. We want to be whiskey nerds and give as much detail as possible, and dive into the process, and be able to send our whiskey to the biggest nerd across the world. But we also want it to be just delicious, so you could say all the process you want in the world, all the details about production, but if it's not just a very delicious whiskey, it's really not going to have legs as a product. Now, you can put out special releases that are kind of strange and funky and esoteric, and those will do well and they'll be fun. But you really need to have, the base of your whiskey product be something that people love to drink. And so that's, as much as we like to nerd out on things, we want things to be somewhat approachable and realize at the end of the day, it's a drink that's supposed to taste good.
It's easy to see why we're so excited to have Jeff heading up sales. He is so much better at the big vision than we are. We just go down into the production process.
I'll also add, though, just from some additional kind of aromas, flavors, I don't know if any of you get tropical fruit notes or citrus notes. That's something we certainly get in this and a lot of our whiskeys, particular citrus, a lot of orange, and then, various tropical fruit notes as well.
I was going to say orange peel more than the sweet orange. So orange, but oily and a little bit more, I guess, spicier orange than that. That's why I'm getting off of that one. And let's stick with the brewing and distilling, because I'm going to quote you from a couple IGTV, so Instagram TV segments that you've done. Whiskey barrels of maturation. First thing you say, distilling is a science, brewing is an art. And then another one called Brewers are Yeast and Fermentation. You say brewers are collectors of ingredients. So can you expand on both of these ideas, please? Because I like where you're going, where I watch the segments, but other people that might not have watched segments, they don't know how these come together. Can you do that for us, Bill?
You bet. This is what I love to do. So thank you for tossing me these wonderful questions. So it turns out that brewers have always known that they're going to try to coax flavors through fermentation of malted barley. They have a variety of maybe 200 different colors that they're using in malted barley to create flavors, colors, aromas. And then by picking the right yeast and the right fermentation conditions, they produce flavors and esters. That's what they do. They collect these ingredients and they put them together just like a chef might go to a farmer's market and find what's fresh, what's delicious, and make a meal that night out of the things that are available. Where the science of distilling is, you don't get to reinvent the boiling point of alcohol. You get to buy and operate quality stills well, and you make decisions, but it's much more about a science. You're determining when the flavors that are coming off the still are going to be ones you want to mature. Well, guess what? Those flavors came from fermentation. They didn't come from the still. They came from your choice of malts. So it's the brewing that, and frankly, it's the fermentation that creates the base of flavors. It's the distilling that collects the good ones, gets rid of the bad ones. And then I always call it white magic is the maturing. You do everything that you thought you should do, and the barrels all are different. Each barrel is different. And that's when blending comes in to become a master of putting all those flavors back. That's where Copperworks has matured the most, is in being able to blend those flavors into each release. Yeah,
and can I answer a question that came up that kind of relates to that?
Yes,
somebody
please.
asked, are we planning on having a flagship whiskey? So we haven't really talked about this, but it should maybe be obvious at this point that all of our releases are slightly different. We have these different recipes, we have different barrel types. We blend them in different ways and come up with different releases. So that's why they have these release numbers. We do hope to have a flagship whiskey at some point, hopefully pretty soon. We've also hinted at the fact that we're working on an expansion, which would allow us to make a lot more whiskey. Right now, we're only making about 125 barrels of whiskey per year. So if we were to settle on a flagship now, it would become not what we want in terms of being able to do other things. We wouldn't have enough extra barrels to experiment and continue to explore this new category that we're creating. But when we expand, we'll be able to make about 10 times that amount of barrels. So then we can create a flagship that represents a half or 2/3 of those barrels. and then continue to play with even 2 to 3 times as many barrels as we're playing with now. So yes, that is definitely a goal, to take kind of the learnings from the first 8 to 10 years of our operations and create at least one flagship. It probably will honestly be 2 or 3, and then continue to experiment with all these fun projects that we've been doing at the initial point of our distillery's life.
Thank you, sir. Good answer. Good question, Dave. And Richard, you had a question as well.
Yeah, just wondering about the barrels. I know that these seem to be, or these are aged in new American oak, and you're mentioning your cooperage as well. Are most of your whiskeys aged in new virgin oak?
Yes.
Or are you sourcing other barrels at all? Trying out some ex-bourbon barrels or wine barrels?
We love the we love oak. First of all, obviously, we want American oak. We have done some French oak, and it was really good, but it's also really expensive. So at this point, we're not doing much of that. What we decided is that we loved Kelvin Cooperage. They're very hands-on. They do everything in a non-scientific way, much more artisan and craft way. And we find that their barrels are generally better and worse than the more consistent independent stave company who does everything scientifically. They're not generally as deviant, but they're generally also not as good as the best Kelvins. So we use about 50% of each of those. We also, about 3 years ago, brought in Canton, which is out of Canton, but they actually are also in Napa, California. So we're using those 3 cooperages and doing different toast and chars. We always do a minimum of 18-month season. Sometimes now we're pretty much standard on 24-month seasoned oak or longer. We do a long toast, so a 40-minute toast, and then a light char, number 1, 2, or sometimes a number 3 char. So all of that to say we're very committed to the barrels new. But the reason we're buying such good barrels new is because we're also thinking that some of our best whiskeys are going to come out of the second fill of those barrels. Okay. And we didn't want to put them in what were bourbon barrels. They're kiln dried, they're not seasoned, they're not toasted, they're heavily charred. Everything we didn't want in a barrel is what bourbon did. So we decided not to use that barrel for our type of whiskey. It works great for bourbon, doesn't work for our type of whiskey. So we're using all of our barrels now a second time. And when that whiskey comes out in a couple of more years, it'll be a whole nother flavor profile. So we'll have the new oak and this second fill, and then we can do releases of each or blend them together. So it's going to be more interesting.
And also, I think we're going to talk about this later, but just to keep in mind with the barrels, a lot of those second fill barrels are using those single varietal malts. And so that's where you get to see the malt sing a little more when it's not covered by as much wood. So we're super excited about that, seeing the difference in varietals in the used barrels, or second fill, first fill, whatever the heck you want to call them, depending on what country you're in.
And we're going to wrap up in a second. Just one really quick question. Is the fact that you temperature control your aging room, your barrels, has that limited your ability to do something like that, to come up with a flagship brand? Do you think if you had another storage space that was triple the size and you were not temperature controlling it, you might be able to do something like that? Or quicker?
No, I think we'd actually get over oaked. Our reason for temperature controlling is that we're optimizing for esterification. We're optimizing for maturing of flavors through oxidation impact, as opposed to optimizing for movement through the wood, for charcoal filtering and bringing in vanillas and caramels. Those are things that we already have in abundance from the flavors of the malt because of the way we do a brew. So we really, even in new warehouses that we'll build, they will have to be temperature controlled for us to have these flavors.
Thank you very much. That was a quick answer, and that's perfect because we're right at the 59-minute mark. So last comments, we're going to go Richard, Kent, Joss, Ash, and then Jeff and Jason, and then we're going to sign off. So Richard, last comments, bud.
Sure. Super grateful to have had the opportunity to try these. They are, I've had the whiskey, I've had the gin. They're solid whiskeys. Really appreciate that you've got it at 50%. I like the bigness that it offers, something that not everybody does. There's nothing to be shy of with this whiskey. It holds its own. Solid. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Kent.
Yeah, I've got to mimic Richard on that one. I think any less, you would hurt the whiskey by going less ABV. You probably could even go a little bit higher on it if you so chose, go into your cask strengths and stuff like that. But then we might have to water it down, so why bother?
We would. You and I would not. We love our 60% whiskey.
I like my cask strength, so yeah, at 50%, was an absolute delicious dram. I don't know what to say about this because I'm just utterly blown away. This has hit my palate with just everything that I enjoy in a whiskey. I was like, not to knock you, but it's an American whiskey and small distillery. I was expecting maybe some sharpness, some bitter, maybe a little hotness. None of that. You guys have nailed this thing. You dialed this in so tight that I can't find fault with it.
Thank you, Ken.
I thought you said you didn't have anything to say.
Well, that's the fault. I'm out. There's the fault. I am, yeah.
Thanks, Ken. That's good. Joss, you're up.
I was just saying, Ash, that I like American whiskey more than bourbon. And I know those usually get lumped in the same category, but I'm really glad that Jason and Jeff are putting in the committed effort to try to put a definition to that, because I think it deserves a space in people's brains when they think of whiskey. Because a lot of people think America, they think whiskey, they think bourbon, and there's a whole lot of stuff outside that. And are you guys thinking American single grain? Or are you thinking American blend? I'm just kidding, but no, we'll save that for the after trim. I just wanted to say, great job, guys. We made a little comment on the drawing. A lot of people look here like, oh, it's drawing on the finish. But it's a nice lingering drying. It really lasts. It sits on your tongue. It's very creamy. It's lovely, really. Great job, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And I do appreciate the drying too. It stays with you, and Kent said it makes you salivate. It's just, and then the flavors come through even more after that. Ash, what do you think? Last comment, sir.
I loved it, but even more so, and I don't think it was mentioned because I'm in the world of food and packaging. This is really bloody smartly done. There are nuances on this bottle that only people in industry will pick up on. It's got such a good weight and a uniqueness in its hand, and there's even so much Americana in this bottle, even just on the label, just the same, almost Budweiser-ish kind of chevron right there.
That's right. We're hearkening to beer.
But you know what? And almost the stonemason kind of insignia there. It's heavy. It feels like a quality bottle. Just from not even opening it, it feels good in my hand, and it's very appreciated. Even the cork itself, the size of it, it just feels really. Even the sound. I mean, there's something that goes into a package and a product that I can appreciate, and even the little row of barley at the top in the label. It is so much to it that I really like, and the taste of it was amazing. But I really can appreciate the packaging on this too. The bottle feels amazing. So good job, wonderful.
Great comments, Ash. Thank you, and thank you for coming on tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Jeff, last comment, sir.
I won't even try to respond to everybody, but just thank you for all the kind words. We're really excited to be in the Canadian market. And, as COVID gets behind us, I can't wait to go up there. As everybody knows, Seattle, is basically a neighbor to Canada. So I'm excited to get up there and a couple of different provinces and check out some cool spots and meet some of you guys in real life and drink some more Copperworks. So thanks for having us on.
Perfect.
Excellent. Thank you very much, sir. And last but not least, Jason.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting us. This has been a real treat, and I want to again iterate how much I appreciate the work you've done to think about the questions that you've asked. And then secondly, Craftwork has been a really huge reason that we are here talking to you today, and we're just really excited to actually finally get out of the state of Washington and out of Seattle proper and have whiskey up there. So I know it says American single malt whiskey on it. Please realize that we're not partial just to America. We love you guys, North American, is what we should have said. So thank you. Yeah.
And we love
really good being a part of this.
Thank you, sir. Well, that's it. Whiskey Brothers, Whiskey Sisters, that's the second edition of the International Whiskey Journey. We're moving our conversation from this more formalized format to a more relaxed, equally engaging. Tons of questions still going to be asked of Jason and Jeff. They're, of course, joining us. And really, what better activity is there on a Friday evening than, I don't know, drinking whiskey and talking to some fantastic people. We're all about that. We're going to be back in about 5 minutes, and we're going to have cocktails this time. And Jeff, I'm going to call upon you to explain exactly what you told us to make. And Kent probably has it done right, but I probably don't. So I want you to be brutally honest with me when you see mine. That'd be good. Back in 5 minutes with the After Dram. If you don't want to miss a minute of us in the future, like and subscribe, and we're going to see you later. Have a fantastic time. Slancha, we'll see you in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, something like that. Cheers, everybody.